The station was brilliantly lit and a little shabby, with antique honeycombed metal flooring that clanged underfoot. In the main circular corridor, there were plenty of people moving purposely in both directions, some in Starcrime uniform, some in ordinary civilian clothes. Most looked like they had somewhere to go in a hurry, although they passed two very young women in civilian dress who were meandering and giggling together, and a uniformed man wandering along slowly with his attention fixed on a reading pad. "This central corridor runs right around the wheel, through the middle," said Jez, as they clattered along. "These doors goes to various places." She indicated doors on either side of the wide passage. "All the public offices are on this main floor. Up a level there's living quarters and recreation. Down a floor, holding cells and maintenance and kitchens and stuff. The spokes are just structure. Except this one." She stopped in front of an open entrance, above which was a sign. "Hub Shuttle." "It's a shuttle that goes to the hub," suggested Andri, as they went along a short passage perpendicular to the main corridor, and stopped in front of a closed door. It had transparent panels, and through the thick perspex-like material, he could see what looked like an empty tube with a track for some fixed vehicle. And space. "I knew there was a reason I wanted you on board." She presented her wrist to a panel on the wall, and it bleeped and glowed green. She gestured for Andri to do the same. Andri had to wiggle his wrist around a bit to make the thing bleep, unused as he was to having a chip. Jez gave a tiny sigh of exasperation. A faint rumbling grew louder, and Andri saw that a shuttle train was lumbering along the spoke towards them. When it arrived, the door lifted to allow them access to a small capsule with worn seats and a really spectacular view of the exterior of the station from inside the wheel. "More security," said Andri. They had already been thoroughly scanned when the shuttle docked, before they'd been allowed to set foot in the station itself. "The hub is where our main operations centre is," said Jez reproachfully. "It's where the Commander-in-Chief of ISIS has his office, and it's where we hold Category 1 prisoners. We can't let just anyone wander in." "Category 1 prisoners?" "Did you fall asleep during that class too? Anyone who's under arrest for espionage or treason or not something dull like murder. We have special cells in the hub to keep the hot potatoes until SIS comes and takes them away." At least he knew that by SIS she meant the United Worlds Security and Intelligence Service, as he had seen as many spy movies as the next nerd. "Do you work with the security service a lot?" he asked carefully, wondering if she was going to tell him there was a module on inter-service cooperation that he had forgotten to download. "It depends," she said. After a pause, she added, "I've only been with ISIS for a year. My boss brought me with him when he was promoted to Commander-in-Chief of that division. I was in F&C before, financial and cybercrime. Well, you know that. We didn't have much to do with spooks. In ISIS, well, the Category 1 holding cells are right underneath our station. So, as you can imagine, we do." The night before, his last night on Earth for the time being, he had taken a quick look in the basic training handbook to check the chapter on the different divisions of Starcrime so that he would have some idea of what he was being dragooned into. There had been talk amongst the students at the training camp about where they wanted to go within the service, but everyone knew that their first posting after graduation would be in Patrol, the core division that dealt with general crime and the spacefaring public, where they would gain experience and learn the basics on the job. New recruits faced a couple of years there before becoming eligible to apply for the specialist divisions. Of these, he had only really heard his classmates talk about the homicide division as an aspiration and space traffic as a joke. It turned out that ISIS stood for Interplanetary Special Investigation Squad, which sounded grand, but non-specific. The textbook didn't give much away either. ISIS was responsible for investigations that do not fall under the remit of other divisions, and that was all. Andri thought this vagueness to be curious. Now he learned that ISIS headquarters occupied by far the most impressive spot in Starcrime Command. He was uncertain why he had been spared the usual apprenticeship in patrol, particularly as he had by no means been a AAA student in basic training. The shuttle arrived at the hub, and Jez led him through to a central office, which he had to pause for a moment to admire. It was a wide circular space, topped by a transparent dome that made the room feel open to the stars. They entered onto a gallery, which ran around the circumference and gave Andri an overview of the main floor, crowded with workstations and officers. "Welcome to ISIS Central," said Jez. "It all happens here." Nobody paid much attention to them, as Jez took him down onto the floor and past her colleagues, although Andri could feel the darts of curiosity he was getting as an obvious new recruit. He tried not to gawp around, hoping to be taken as a semi-seasoned space cop just out of patrol, and not a codehead who had put on this uniform for the first time the day before. He did notice that one or two of the officers smiled or nodded at Jez, and one young woman said in greeting, "Hey, Captain!" But Jez returned none of the acknowledgements. She did look upwards, however, and Andri followed her gaze to see a large, broad officer up on the gallery, on the opposite side to the main entrance. His upright stance and folded arms, and the way he was surveying the office below with a proprietorial air, suggested authority. Jez quickened her pace and hopped up the few steps to meet him. "Glad to see you back so soon," the superior officer said, in a deep voice with a strong twang of an accent. "And this is the famous Mr. Ferris, Tobias Judd, Commander-in-Chief of ISIS." Andri shook the commander's hand, feeling awkward, aware that the other officers below were watching the scene. Commander Judd was not a tall man. He saw now that he was in front of him. The general impression of size he gave was generated by his physical bulk and the strong assurance he radiated. He also seemed foreign to Andri, as he had the deeply dark, almost black skin predominant amongst peoples from planets such as Harare and New Orleans. While he had met people with this kind of skin on Earth, Earth was a cosmopolitan mixture of every variety of human and alien, although you weren't supposed to use that word. It still seemed exotic to Andri, who had grown up in a world where everyone was pale. "Let's go into my office, where we can talk in peace," said Judd. Andri followed him through the door behind him, into a sizable private office with a window that curved across all one wall. He couldn't help pausing once again to marvel at the view of the outer wheel of the station gleaming against open space, and the stars hard and bright beyond. "Great view, isn't it?" said Judd, grinning. "I've been here a year, and I'm still not used to it myself. Like my desk? Cost me a fortune to have it shipped up from Earth, but I've never been without it." He patted an ancient-looking, wooden leather-topped desk that looked totally out of place in the metallic interior of the station. "Here, take a seat, and let's talk about what you've let yourself in for." Reassured by the commander's friendly manner, so different from Captain Jez's prickliness, Andri took the chair indicated. Jez perched on the very edge of hers and started studying her fingertips. "How much do you know about ISIS?" Judd asked, settling himself comfortably behind his desk. He glanced at Jez and said, "Really, nothing at all, sir." "All right. That's how we like it. We handle the difficult cases, the delicate assignments, the complicated investigations that none of the other divisions can touch. In particular, we look after anything that even smells like it might involve non-unionists. And the stronger those non-unionists smell Darien or Tazen, the closer we stick to it. And within the Union, if it involves any government, particularly the government, It's ours. That means we operate more discreetly than the rest of the force, and we have more leeway. And we need a different kind of officer. I'm not looking for picture-perfect rookies that came top of the class at basic training. I'm looking for real talent. According to Captain Jez, you can break into anything electronic. I'm a hacker, he said with a shrug. I had thought you probably wanted me in the financial and cybercrime division, if you wanted me anywhere. That was the first idea, said Judd, looking at Jez. That's where we both were when you came to our attention. But then I got this chance to head up ISIS, and Jez here convinced me that your skills would be even more useful as part of our new team. Andri was not thrilled to learn that he had Jez to thank for being whisked straight out of basic into what seemed like a prestigious division, as well as being spared jail and recruited into the Bureau in the first place. It made him uncomfortable to owe such an obligation to this strange woman, and he wasn't even sure why. She had gone back to looking at her fingernails, her expression blank. Now, according to my information here, you don't have a pilot's license. No, sir. I did get my hovercar license, but to be honest, I've never been in one since the day I took the exam, and that was 2 years ago. Not to worry. It's a start. Before you can get to work here, you need to learn to fly. Captain, I'm pulling you off active duty until you've taught Officer Ferris the basics, and he can show me he can take the swordfish out of the hangar without crashing it into a spoke. Jez looked up with a frown. She clearly hadn't been expecting that. What about the Morris case, sir? I thought you'd dump him on flight control for that. I'm not a flying instructor. I handed the Morris case over to Gerard while you were planetside, said Judd. You might not be a qualified instructor, but you're the best pilot I know, as well as the most dangerous. I'd like to keep Officer Ferris in the division, and it will help you bond, he added with a wide grin. New partners need to get to know each other. Andri and Jez looked at each other at the same moment, and Andri was sure he could see his own thoughts mirrored in her expression. Not that one! That one! Jez slammed her hand against one of 2 entirely identical switch panels before he had a chance to correct his mistake, then uttered a harsh stream of gibberish. 2 days into the training mission, Andri had turned off his translator. It made things marginally less stressful if he couldn't understand her expletives. They were now 16 days in and had travelled deep into the hinterland of the Union. Jez had wanted to give Andri an overview of all the things the Razor could do, including lessons in how to power the ship into hyperspace and how to navigate through the void. So they had made several hops, each one longer than the last, getting further and further away from Earth. They had even stopped at one of the central government space stations that were situated strategically throughout the Union. They were not, he was surprised to discover, true constructions in space like Starcrime Command, but domed-in facilities built on dead worlds and asteroids to provide amenities for space travellers. It was so that Andri could learn to land and take off on a surface where he wouldn't kill anything except possibly themselves, and because, Jez said, she needed a drink. It was unfair. He just wasn't that bad. For someone who had only ever operated a hovercar before, and that for only 2 hours a week, Andri thought he was picking it up pretty quickly. But nothing pleased or impressed Captain Jez. If he got something right, her highest praise was a sarcastic acknowledgement that he hadn't screwed up this time. And if he made a mistake, she was fiercely impatient. Andri was beginning to wonder why she had been so keen to recruit him and then bring him into ISIS, when she didn't seem prepared to work with him. She could hardly be disappointed in his performance, as he had never claimed to be any kind of pilot. He was finding it increasingly difficult to bite his tongue and not tell her to stuff it, that he would stick to hacking and skip the inept piloting. He had to remind himself with an effort that he no longer got a choice, that orders weren't optional. They had arrived early that morning at a planetary system with an inhabited world, an old Earth colony called Hope, which was the kind of cheesy name they had given planets in the colonial era. He thought he had heard something on the news about this world recently. It was probably one of those planets celebrating its millennium this year. There had been a handful of millennium celebrations over the past few years, as the oldest of the Earth colonies reached that milestone one by one. "This is so we can practice approaching planetary space," she said, "but nowhere busy, to minimise the possibility of you crashing into the local traffic." "I haven't crashed into anything yet." "You would only do it once." No! What did I tell you about the warp stabilizers? Keep them on until the crystal has cooled to 3%. Do we have to go through the normal space re-entry protocol again? We've only done this 18 incomprehensible something times. Obscenities in her language, whatever it was, were full of impressive plosive consonants and guttural semivowels. They were drawing near enough to the inhabited world now to see its atmospheric swirls, and the larger of its orbitary structures, and a smallish moon. The planet had a red tinge and a dense swathing of muddy clouds, very unlike the bright, welcoming blue of Earth. Andri wondered if the early settlers had been dismayed by the sight of their new home after a journey that in those days would have taken over a year. It didn't look at all hospitable. "All right," said Jez, taking a deep, exasperated breath. "This is similar to approaching the station. In a few minutes we'll be in controlled space, and we have to engage with space traffic control, but the difference is we have to be passed through 3 sets of controllers before we can make planetfall. Deep space control, atmospheric control, and ground control. Got that?" "I think so," said Andri, feigning earnestness. She glared at him. "To get your pilot's license, you'll have to pass an exam on all of this, learn the terminology and all that garbled rubbish. It's complicated. We haven't got time for that. I'm just giving you the general idea, so pay attention." "Yes, ma'am." "Deep space control handles traffic from when it enters controlled space to when it breaks atmosphere. Now, can you remember which control opens the short-range comms channel?" "No! That's long-range!" "You know, it would help if there were labels." "Just pay attention." A triangle of light next to the control he had almost pressed started flashing, and Jez sighed again. "Gobbledygook. Who did you manage to call?" "Look, I didn't even touch." "This is Starcrime Mission Ship Razor. Captain Jez speaking," she said, in an entirely different professional voice. "Please identify yourself. Can I help you?" "I should hope so, Captain." The voice that boomed out the speaker was unmistakable in its dark musical tones. "How's the training going? It would have been nice to have seen some reports." "Sorry, sir. We've been busy." "Very well. It's going very well." Andri blinked at her in amazement. "Good. His playtime's over. We've got a situation on Hope. And that's where you are, so it's yours." "Officer Ferris isn't ready for active service yet. Can't you send in another team?" "He's graduated basic training and signed the pledge. He's as ready as he needs to be. This is an emergency. Head straight down to their capital city. You're to liaise with Mayor Elia Anderson." "What's the situation?" Jez asked, as she took back control and accelerated the ship. "They've mislaid a Tazen prince." Now that, Andri thought, was the most explosive cluster of gibberish yet.